Yeah, we're live. 5:14. A little early for the nighttime. Late late for the early morning, but that's all good. Um, well, we cover that. Today, what we want to talk about is Lash, and I was going through some Dyno results. And I was taking a look at what happened when we adjusted the Lash. So, if we take a look at on these, we do it occasionally. If we put solid roller stuff in, obviously we're not adjusting the lash on a hydraulic roller or a hydraulic flat tap it. Sometimes we just push rod length or things. Excuse me. On those, but on a solid roller application, I run a lot of those on big blocks, sometimes on small blocks. Don't run them normally on LSs, but big block forwards also solid roller stuff. But solid flat tap and stuff. When I was doing the series on all of the high performance kind of legendary muscle car stuff from the 60s and early 70s, a lot of them had solid flat tapping camshafts. They didn't have solid rollers back then, but solid flat tapping cams. And the interesting thing is that you get, given that these were from the 60s and 70s, it shouldn't really come as too much of a surprise that when we adjust the lash on these camshafts, on the solid roller camshafts or on the solid flat tap camshafts, we have a change in power. We affect the power curve, not just greater or less, but sometimes both at different RPM. Because what you're doing is effectively, like for instance, if we have a camshaft that calls for 20,000 slash or 30,000 lash, you measure it with the feeler gauge, the camshaft. You have the cam on the heel of the cam so that the valve isn't open at all, and then you adjust the lash. You put lash in it for the ramp rate and run the motor like that. Now, obviously, with lash, it would for a lot of guys that aren't used to that for those kinds of muscle cars, you may think that has like lifter tick because there is some valve train noise with lash, especially if it's excessive. But at temperature, the lash is going to change. So whether you measure it hot or cold, you get different numbers. And it's not that big a deal as long as you adjust for that and you're wanting to make them all the same. So sometimes we have different lash for the intake and the exhaust, with different temperatures associated with those valves and stuff. Or the lobes could be different on the camshaft, could be another reason. But I want to talk about a couple of tests that I did, and that's the first one was with I tried this on the DZ302 because it had that Duntov cam, and so did the L76, the 365 horse 327. We also ran the 375 horse version, which was basically just that motor with the fuel injection, and then the LT1, which actually had a slightly smaller cam, a milder cam in 1970 than the 302 did, and did that and then did the 327. But the one thing they shared is they all had solid lifter camshafts and they all had some sort of prescribed lash. And when we ran the prescribed lash, it gave us a particular power curve. And then what happened almost without fail with all of those small block combinations is what we wanted to do was tighten the lash up. They had a lot of lash from 20 to 30 thousandths. And with that much lash, they're noisy. But it also tends to do is tame the cam down, because you have the lift and duration of the camshaft, and then you subtract what happens when there's lash. So at zero lash, you have what that cam is doing, what it's doing on what the cam lobe is doing, and then what gets multiplied by the rocker ratio. Well, you're having that, and then if you subtract the lash from that, you're not actually getting that. So you're getting less. You're both getting less lift, which is the big effect from the change in lash, but also you're getting a change in duration. So what happens is you change the power curve, and in all those instances on the small block Chevy, what had happened was when we tighten the lash up, so it went from 30 to 20 to 10, there's obviously a limit to how far you should go. But when we tight lash this thing, what it did was they made more power on the top. But as is often the case when we effectively changed the cam timing, there was a change in power down low. And so what you've done by altering the lash that way, especially if you're doing it significantly, if you're changing it from 30 to 10 thousandths, let's say, you're basically making the cam timing you're making the camshaft effectively more aggressive. And this is exactly what it showed on the dyno. So we lost some power down low and gained power up top. Now, not a lot, 8 or 10 horsepower seemed to adjust it, which is why if you look back through a lot of the old Hot Rod and Carcraft and those kinds of magazines for stuff in the 60s and 70s, when they're talking about this, oh yeah, some of the things that they did back then when they were making the, let's say that they were testing a 69 Z28 at the drag strip. Changing the lash would be one of the things that they would do to try to improve the performance of it. They would also possibly rejet the carburetor. They would also, some of the things that they did to hop them up, they would also change the ignition curve so that it comes all in sooner. They'd be running good gas back then anyways on these high compression motors, but gears and slicks and traction bars and that kind of stuff. But sometimes to super tune it, they would play with lash, they'd play with carb jetting, and they would play with ignition timing, and that could have positive effects. Because if you get 8 or 10 from the lash, you might be able to, if the thing is running rich from the factory, you might be able to get additional power from the carburetor. You're going to if the distributor has a slow curve, getting it to come in earlier. All of that would benefit, and we certainly saw that. We saw that on all the camshafts. We saw that on the effect I think was greatest on the 302. But we also saw a similar thing on the 327 and on the 350, even on the milder cam 350. But I also saw it when we did stuff with the Ford. So when we tried it on the Boss 351 and also on the smaller 289. Now, one of the 351 Clevelands I tested had a hydraulic flat tapping cam, so we obviously didn't adjust that. But on the 289, and especially when we stepped up to the Shelby mod, so we did the HIPO stuff. And then put the aluminum intake, and I don't think I had a 715 carburetor. We probably put a 750 or something on it. And then we ran a set of tri-Y headers on that one also. But whether we had it in 280, 270, 271 horse, 289 guys, or the Shelby version, which was rated at 306, adjusting the lash on the camshaft on the HIPO 289 cam definitely had an effect on power. And it did the same thing that it did on the small block Chevy. We did pick up power up top and did trade a little bit power down low. That camshaft didn't seem to trade as much down low as the camshafts that they used in the Chevy versions, which is maybe not surprising, because that camshaft on the Ford was 25 or 30 degrees less duration than it was in the small block Chevy. And so we were, if we got a 254 camshaft, which is what that 302 camshaft was, and then you got a 221 camshaft, which is I think about what the Ford was, they're going to respond differently to changes in lash. And that's exactly what happened. But we did see a change, and something that's worthwhile. And again, as always, it would be nice to just get a power gain everywhere. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. We see this sometimes with the dancing and retarding the cam. We saw it with lash on it, and it was cool to be able to go to do that during those builds, because that's what the OG guys would have done. That's what the guys that either got these cars when they were new, because I mean, if we go back, a $3,000 or $4,000 Mustang was back then was expensive, and guys in high school or whatever at the time wouldn't have had a new one of those. They would have had that, like I had my Camaro, when it was already 6 or 8 or 10 years old, let's say, and then they were driving those things around. So, they would have been doing that stuff to it. If you didn't, the distributor curve, you could do for little or no money. Jetty, you could do for little or no money. You could, headers were, back in the day, you could buy headers for $30, $29.95, complete with the nuts, bolts, and gaskets. You could do a lot of that stuff, and it was fairly inexpensive. Guys that were working could do some of that stuff, and you could hop it up. If you had to buy, put a different motor in it, or buy aluminum cylinder heads back that way, you probably wouldn't have been able to buy any Ford aluminum heads. But if you wanted to hop that up, it'd have been more expensive. But those easy things like, lash and carb jetting and ignition timing back in the day, that certainly would have been the things that you would have been doing. And as we saw on the dyno, there was a reason that they were doing it, because it worked. Let's see what you guys got going on. And by the way, when we've tried this on tightening the lash up on, solid roller camshafts, we oftentimes see a similar thing. Tim, Eric, Aaron, what's going on? Marilyn's in the house. I knew it was coming. I'm using solid flat tappets. Great throttle response. Good evening. Does the Lash change worse on aluminum heads versus cast iron? I didn't. All of these motors that we tested these flat tappet cams on, they were all iron-headed ones. The ones that we ran were all factory iron-headed deals. So I can't remember if we tried. I'll have to go back and look, because I know on the 327, I don't know if we did it on the LT1. We didn't put aluminum heads on the 289 Ford. I know that. But we did put airflow research heads on the 327. I'd have to go back and look. And then we also did a comp cam in it. And we did a cam that was, I think it was a 274 solid, if I remember right. Might have been a 280 something solid. So I'll have to go back and look and see if we adjusted the lash, because I could go through the notes and see if we did that. But it'd be interesting to see if it was, if it wanted more or less, or if there was more of a change. What you'd want to see basically there is maybe what the hot lash is versus the cold lash, both with the iron heads and with the aluminum heads, to get an idea what the change is. Solid lifters definitely make some noise, especially at startup. Forged pistons do that too. Proper clearance between the rocker and the tip of the valve is critical to prevent wear of the rocker and the valve tip. Is it really worth running solid stuff on anything but the most extreme applications? It seems like hydraulic roller stuff is wonderful and it'll do 99%. Yeah, I mean, guys, a lot of times for those particular things, for those legendary muscle car deals, they want to put stuff in that's, that's original, because a lot of those guys are restoring this thing, so they want it to be the way that it was when it was factory. Never mind whether or not that's optimum, because it's not. A set of HIPO heads is not that. They're not good. That any sort of modern aluminum head is head and shoulders above that. So you can make a lot more power with modern stuff, and you can make there are way better camshafts than a HIPO 289 camshaft, and there should be. If you're looking at a 65 Mustang, that's a long time ago. That's almost 60 years ago. Cam technology has come a long way, and you would expect that. You'd expect stuff to be a lot better. If I had something that I was driving around, a hydraulic roller cam is probably the way that I would go. But if you have a 69 HIPO K car like I had, a HIPO 289, you're not driving that around every day. Guys are not driving those all the time. And if you do have a driver that's a 65 Mustang, it's probably going to be a hydraulic flat tappet, if anything. Is it really worth running solid stuff on anything but the most extreme applications? Yep, we saw that. Let's see. Okay, would you risk a solid flat tappet cam in a modern small block Chevy or small block Ford buildup today? Let me know. Let me know. Let me know, Joe. I'm going to go from top chat, go over live to all the way live. So I was working today with my buddy Jimmy, trying to get a store and everything set up for my camshaft company. And it'll be more than camshafts. So right now it's camshafts, but it'll be more than that. So we're trying to get all that set up to help everybody out, give them options for getting that stuff taken care of, so that I can offer all of the stuff that I want to offer. What I'm doing is I want to have a store that's dedicated to a channel, a website, whatever, that's dedicated to the stuff that I have tested and that I know works. And so if somebody says, hey, what does this do? I can say, look, here's why I'm offering that. Same reason I'm offering the low buck truck camshaft that I have that works really well, and the truck plus camshaft. The reason that I offer those is because I've tested them a lot and they've been tested a lot. And I know that they work and I know that they're a good piece. Same thing with a lot of these things, GT45 turbos, I want to be able to offer the things I recommend most often. So we want to have the right injector size. We want to have the right turbo size, intercoolers and springs. And I want to have a spring setup to go with the camshafts. I want to be able to have all that stuff, and I'm not going to go crazy, but I get those questions all the time when we're the camshafts, which are doing very well. Lots of people want them. They seem to be helping a lot of people, and it's an LS performance camshaft for $179 is markedly better than the other stuff that is out there in the market. So, it's a good deal. And that's why I wanted to do that. And it's something that I've wanted to do for, I would say going on 10 years now. And so here I am 10 years later, finally getting something done. Marshall, Brandy, good evening. I'm planning on starting my first LS swap for a drift car. What's a good guideline on building an LM7? I still don't have a feel for what you're doing on a drift car, actually, but there's lots of videos I have up on the channel on how to make power with an LM7. 5.3, you go with, if it's going to be NA, you go with more compression, bigger cam, different intake, ported heads. If it's going to be boosted, ring gap, injectors, fuel pump, some sort of cam, and if you want to run more RPM, some kind of intake. Richard, does a Holley HP system have provisions for knock sensors? I don't know if the HP does. I'm trying to think what Eric just used recently. I don't know if that was a Dominator or a Terminator. It might have been a Terminator X. Let's see. The HP might. Do they even offer that anymore? The system does have dual knock sensor support. It's designed into the LS harness. And I was excited and pleasantly surprised that on the last time when we ran that 427 LS7 based crate motor, that when Eric ran that, the knock sensors were hooked up and they were active. And so we could see knock counts, which there were none. And we could see if the knock was taking any timing away, which it didn't. And we were running on 91 and we ran 29 degrees of timing. And so there was no knock sensor activation, which we knew looking at the power curve, having done this a lot, that when there is detonation, you can see it. A lot of times on the chassis dyno, you can see it in the exhaust if there's detonation. But it would be nice to have to correlate it to see how much it was pulling away. So it'd be nice. And so if that's something that I can incorporate into these, I can do other kinds of testing, which would be cool. Like we could do pump gas stuff. Late arrival. Did you already cover one of the two remaining flat tap core makers is not making new cores? I didn't know that. I didn't know that was the case. What extra voltage needed for 250 liter per hour, 340 or NA, or boost under 15 psi? Are you wanting to run them at more than 13.5 volts or whatever on the pump? I saw an interesting thing, and I think it's BS, but I saw a thing on either Facebook or Instagram about a guy talking about burning pumps up with like a boosted pump. about how the pump plugs or something are only rated for a certain, voltage or amperage, and how those will destroy it and stuff. And I have never seen that. I know this is off topic for tonight's video, but you have sparked my interest in the V10 stuff. I recently bought a 64 Falcon and love the other guys' ideas, and then you lose me at thoughts. So I don't know what you mean by thoughts. How much money would it take to make the GM L8T 6.6 comparable in horsepower or torque to a 5LP Duramax? I don't know. You're never going to get the thing to make the torque that a Duramax does down low. You won't get it that RPM range. I know that I was just talking to Brian Tooley, and he's been posting lots of stuff on the stuff that they're doing for, it's Power Nation or Power Auto Media or one of those guys. And they're running an L8T that they ran an NA and did a bunch of testing with it. And then they upgraded it with forged internals, aluminum rods and stuff. And I honestly don't know why people pick that, but, and they've run it with a big ProCharger, I think. And it's up over 2,000 horsepower. So it's making a lot of power. Terminator X Universal has a plug for knock sensors. A buddy bought a 70s El Camino with a 383. Small tire car, has nitrous. He's converting it back into a cruiser, already removed the nitrous. He wants to find a 400 for it. Continuing on the next message. Amos, what's going on? I ran 39 degrees in the 8.1 big block. I think I dropped a piston during the duct tape drags. Uh-oh. Do you find that it wanted that much? I thought that we ran a whole bunch less timing than that on the 8.1. My HP had a menu listing for knock sensors, and you don't have to use them in the tune. Yeah, we never had them. I've never plugged them in for any of the stuff that we've done. She was 1139 until she was not. Yeah, probably Julian Rick Smith had an upload the other day that was nearly 5 hours long. That was taken down by YouTube. Yeah, I remember Brian talking to me about that interview that they did, and no interview should be 5 hours. They should have definitely, whoever did that should have definitely broken it down into many, many segments. That's just not, I mean, a guy's not going to sit there for 8 hours or 5 hours. And also they would do much better with YouTube loading multiple videos. I mean, I don't know why they would do that. Going to be replicating your Amos. You're shifting at 5,700. Lots of torque. Is it going to be replacing your nitrous build or replicating the nitrous build from a few years ago on a 5.3? Hopefully you can keep it from going lean. Are you doing not the Big Bang one, right? Goal is to build 1,000 to 1,200 horsepower twin turbo LS on E85 with an iron block for a 3,000 pound street car. If we were doing that, we would just go get a wrecking yard and do that with whatever the stock compression is. He's out in San Angelo, Texas. I asked him what's wrong with the 383. He said chasing lifter tick. Besides displacement, would it be more effective just to fix the 383, knowing how it already works? I would think. I mean, it's hard to know from from a text and from the multiple different levels of dissociation that I have from me to you to him to whatever's going on with the motor. But if it's a lifter replacement, that's fairly easy. I bet they showed something in the shop that wasn't supposed to be shown. Instead of trying to source a 400. Okay. I don't know that you're going to gain much with a 400 over a 383. Are you doing that because it's period correct for the car or something? The Big Bang one is one I'm going to try to make 1,000 wheel on spray. Okay. We could, if I redid it, we could certainly make a lot more power than we did. And I think we could get to 4-digit power level. 1,000 of the tire, if you're doing it on a 5.3, I think is going to be hard. I'm going to tear the motor down to figure out what exactly failed, but one cylinder is firing. Is it only one cylinder is firing? It sounds funny. I presume bore spacing is different on the 400. It's not. A 400 small block is the same bore spacing. The block is the same. Everything bolts on the same. It's just that they're Siamese bores, and the 400 is a 4125 bore. Scott, scrolling back, scrolling. Definitely got a peek at something of yours in the 5-hour interview. Was it the V12? Because that was at Brian's shop. All 8 are firing. Just one of them sounds off. Okay, one of them's not. One is not holding his end of the bargain up. I believe he's making it period correct. I'll check what year it is, but I'm thinking the 383. Okay. Have you tested a 5.3 with a 4-inch stroke? Yeah, many times. We've built lots of, and also a 4.8 because it's the same block. But we've run lots of 383s with those. So we usually go up in bore when we do that too. Does Rick Smith still have any pull or contacts with Trick Flow anymore after the Summit buy? I need to contact someone and get some accurate information on the small ductwork box intake. Customer reps don't help. No, they don't. And you're not going to get any more information from them because I have ins with Trick Flow. I have the guys that know. But if they tell you that they're not producing them or that there's no schedule to produce them, that's what the information is. My stock 460 trans with a 3000 stall hold up to a Trick Flow 515 horse head and cam kit. No. Are Mellings lifters made in China? I don't know where Melling sources their stuff. As long as you do the break-in correctly, flat tappets are fine. $1,000 to 1,200 horsepower twin turbo LS on the 85 with an iron block. Would you keep the stock crank? Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with the stock crank at that power level, and you could put forged rods and pistons in it. 1,000 to 1,200 is a big change, is a big step. So we had 100 runs or more at 1,000 or at 1,000 and over horsepower on the stock bottom end, stock crank, stock rod, stock pistons on lots of the different LS motors, the 4.8, the 5.3, and the 6.0. And so you'll get a lot like that, especially if you have a fairly conservative tune and you got good turbos and you got good temperature and good fuel and stuff. That's not going to be hard at all. I'm having trouble keeping my tube for the turbo on. They keep blowing off. Do you not have enough overlap for your couplers? Are the tubes that you have, do they not have any beads on them to clamp onto? Solid tappets here, good oil, Rotella. Tell me it's not good stuff. Pearl 16 Corvette servo holds up to how much? I don't know. I don't have a feel for that. That's what I have in mind. Melling parts, at least what I bought, is made in the United States. I don't know who's is Johnson or who's making lifters anymore in the United States. You're only running 8 pounds. Do you have a blow-off valve on that, Todd? I thought that you did. I thought that you were good to go. What would you trans? Well, if you're wanting to make a lot of power, most people will go to a 4L80. I think guys on an NA one that's making 500 horsepower, I think that you could get the 4L60 probably to work. I just also hear horror stories that they break when you look at them incorrectly. I think about the Summit Pro LS kit for that, Chris. Summit was having trouble getting rods a while ago, and the delay was until New Year's on some setups. Oh. With duration 270 and 280 at 50, 106 center. Need more jetting than a milder cam. It might not. It actually counterintuitively might need more jetting down low. because the signal is going to be bad with a cam that's that big. Unless I'm guessing you have that on a big block, because almost nobody runs a 270, 280 cam on a small block or on an LS or anything. On a big block, the signal is going to be better, particularly if it's a 540 or 555 or 565 or something, where guys tend to run cams like that. But what happens when the signal is good, where the motor's making power, where those cams want to be effective, assuming that you have the right intake manifold that helps that, and the cylinder head flow, that you have a good signal to the carburetor. If you have a good signal to the carburetor, it draws the right amount of fuel. You're going to have to wiggle that around, but a lot of people think that you have to change the jetting because you are making more power. But if you're making more power, a lot of times the signal's better, and that takes care of itself. Carburetor a lot of times is we think of it as a mechanical mass air meter. And I say that I talked to Tex Brule today, so I was chatting with him. That's kind of his deal. You bought the trick flow kit? Okay, good. The tubes do not have ridges. How can I? Yes, Turbo Smart. Okay. Yeah, you need to bead those. Or a lot of times what we'll do, if you can weld aluminum, if you have a guy, you can just weld beads onto it too. And that way, when you clamp it on the other side of that. So as it's trying to pull it off, because if it's particularly if it's polished aluminum tubing or something, it's very slick. And if you can get them to separate, particularly at a turn, because it wants to push the turn away, then that's what happens. We were, excuse me, we went through that on the Big Bang deal when I did it with Engine Masters, and we blew the discharge tube off for that reason, because we didn't have enough. I mean, we were running 29 pounds, and we didn't have enough overlap. I shouldn't have had silicone couplers. This should have been a fixed aluminum tube with a V-band and all that stuff at that power level and that boost level. But it wasn't, because that's not how I do it. That's not how I roll. What we ended up doing is putting really long couplers on them and then multiple clamps, and then that cured the problem. How often have you tested cams with wide intake exhaust split, a 230, 280? I don't think I've ever tested a 230, 280. I don't think I've ever gone that far. I think that some of the GM stuff I've seen is kind of like that. We've seen 20 or 25 degree split stuff, but I don't know if I've ever tried something that's 50 degrees of split. What's your go-to assembly lube? The Lucas guys, when Tom was at Lucas Oil, Lucas gave us a few bottles of their assembly lube, and I've used that, and that's worked really well. Thinking Bosch 210 injectors for the LS. That's more than enough injector for what you're doing. Lost my 90 coming from the turbo yesterday. Oh, the elbow. If the air is going in a direction and then you have like a 90-degree turn there, it hits that wall and wants to push that thing away. When it's straight and just expanding, you get some growth that way, but it's not usually as problematic with that. But on the turn stuff, it gets bad. Lucid Red is good stuff. There's actually a assembly lube. I don't have a problem with assembly lube, and I don't use assembly lube unless we're not going to put the motor on the dyno for a while. If it's going to sit for a while, I'll use assembly lube. Otherwise, if I'm putting it together to run on the dyno that day or the next day, I just use oil, unless it's a flat tappet, and then I do something different. How much cam can my stock L69 HO handle? Rest of the motor in the car is stock. You're going to have to change springs on that, and you probably could go, like most of them, 220s, 230s at 50 if you wanted to. I don't think I would do that if the rest of it's going to stay stock. The Lucas Red stuff, yeah. But I've used stuff from Redline Oil and various places, and a lot of it's good. If it's something that's going to sit for a while, I like the stuff that's thick, that stays together and kind of holds on to the machined areas. Double clamps. Yeah, we did. Because if you have a, if you have the fitting in the middle and the two tubes come together, if you have this much coverage, like an inch or an inch and a half on either side of the separation, that's not really very, very much. It doesn't have to move very much to come out. But if you have 6 inches of coupler and then you got a double clamp, it's never going to pull out past that. And so you don't really have to worry about that. I could send you my 5.3 and you could redo the nitrous build. Yeah, that's not something. I would like to redo the Big Bang nitrous thing, and I would do it differently this time. Have you experimented with Singaroos and the cylinder heads? I remember reading about them on Speed Talk a year ago, allegedly supposed to smooth idle and make more detonation resistance. I haven't tested that, but one of the things Brian and I have been talking about doing for a lot of years now is doing an actual back-to-back test on softening the chambers. And I think that would, I think that'd be eye-opening for a lot of people, particularly for them where they were doing, and then maybe they were doing this with James. I don't know. They had some class-specific cars that they were running, and they were running, they're maxing out the turbo basically, and so they're doing all the turbo, and high compression, and then juggling the camshaft to try to get everything that they could. And then having I remember him telling me that when they did soften the chambers, that they could put more timing in it before detonation. I think it would be interesting personally to do, not for that kind of application. I mean, that's cool, but it's a limited market. But I think it would be cool to do on a set of 706 heads on a 6-liter in a truck. So take the 317s off, put 706 heads on, and maybe do some, like we had talked about. I would even be open to bigger valves on the 706 heads and unshroud the chamber, and maybe even do a little bowl blend, but then soften the chambers so that you could take advantage of the extra compression. So it'd be interesting to see how much you could get away with before running pump gas. Like what could we do with that? And having the knock sensors at our disposal would be good. How long can a motor sit after assembly of a cam and head swap? Lucas should hold on for a month or so. Oh yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I don't think that would be an issue at all. 76 Elco, 250 inline 6, 305, 350, 400 were engine options. Okay. In 76, all of those were? For me, I'd keep the 383. Yeah, a 76 El Camino, you're not restoring back to factory fresh condition. So any of those were fine. My guess is in 76, a 400, what was that thing rated at? Was it even 200 horsepower? Can I use stock springs with 480 lift? Roger, on what motor are you asking about? I don't know what engine family you're talking about, Roger. I try to scroll back to see if I could see. Well, 4.8, hope so. Cougar, my junk has been sitting longer than. Yeah, no, I'm talking about having it sit like a year or something. I don't think it'd be a problem at all for that kind of assembly loop. Will 4.8 allow for more duration camshaft over a 5.3 since it has less stroke? No, it's actually the reverse. How much was the CC change when they did the softening the chamber? They didn't change the compression. The compression stayed the same. Thank you for your guidance on this build. You're right, that's 60 with 78, 75. Todd, what 60 are you talking about? Are AFR heads worth buying over ported 243s? Well, I have to caveat this. Which AFRs, and then who did the porting on the 243s? So if you look at the videos I have up of professionally ported 243s, the guys from Total Engine Airflow did, and back then I think that that's probably when Brian owned it. But those heads are as good as a set of aftermarket heads. So you'd you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between those and a good set of aftermarket heads. Now, if they're not professionally ported like those guys did, and they're hand ported by some guy, they could also be worse than stock. So they could be anywhere from worse than stock to something better than stock to as good as this kind of thing is. And then, are you talking about an AFR enforcer head that's an as cast head, or are you talking about an AFR like CNC head? Like, and then what size is it? Is it a 230 LSX V2 head? Is it 245? What is it? So I guess the answer is it depends. I've seen guys put smaller valves in so they sit deeper in the chamber. I have a Gen 453. There's a valve relief in the oil pan for the DOD. Can I delete it when doing a DOD delete? Yeah, a lot of guys will, if that's is that like an LC9 or something, or an LH6? A lot of guys change the pans on those. 60 over, been sitting for 5 years, went out and rotated it, been sitting in the garage in a tropical climate. As long as you don't have the, as long as there's spark plugs in it, and that it has a carburetor on it, or it has a cover over the intake manifold, and moisture doesn't have access into the shiny bits, it should be fine. I would be less worried about in a motor. I wouldn't be worried about the bearing stuff at all. I would be way more worried about the cylinder walls for stuff coming off of those. The bearings are going to be, because before I would run a motor that sat for a year, I would pre-lube it anyways. So all the bearing stuff and the lifter stuff is all going to take care of itself, unless the lifter bore is somehow uncovered and gets stuff on it. But I'd be worried about the cylinders more than anything. Oh, the 6 liter. Yeah, Todd. Yeah, the 6 liter definitely is a way to go. Even a fraction of a cc. A fraction of a cc doesn't change the power, though. 4.8 has longer connecting rods, but shorter stroke length. What stall range would you go with a 500 horsepower LS1 going in a 69 Camaro? How did you get the 500 horsepower? Just tell me what the camshaft is. And the camshaft and the intake manifold will give me an idea what stall should be. I was wondering, is turbo size by horsepower goals more or displacement? I actually bought a 7875 with a 0.68. I don't know that I've ever even seen that. For an LS, I know it's way too small, but I know it's way too small for a 5.3. Would it be decent or something like a TPI? Well, first of all, a 7875 isn't too small for a 5.3. A 7875 is like a 900 horsepower turbo. I've never heard of a 0.68 AR on a 7875. Usually they're much bigger than that. So I'd be worried about the hot side. But if anything, a 0.68 AR on a 7875 would be more conducive to a 5.3 than it would be to a 6.0. So a 4.8 or a 5.3 might work okay on. Glenn wants to know how you diagnose PO39015. I'm sure that that's a code on his car or truck. What do you think of making 57300 and 6030 connecting rods for a small block Chevy to make better quench? How do you think that that's going to affect quench? I was just looking for a number as small as it might be. My next build will be just that, big compression. When I CC heads, I don't look for a 1/10 of a cc when I'm measuring them, because that's not really relevant. The next will be big compression, big lift, big duration. That's good. Yeah, Chris, I personally wouldn't go with a stage 2 turbo cam. I would go with something smaller than that. If they have a stage 1, I would do that. I probably would go with the Truck Norris or something like that, just because I would want more low speed response, especially if it's a street car, and especially if you have AC and you want it to idle and stuff. I would go with the smaller cam. What do you recommend as far as prep for letting a motor sit for a year or longer? Make sure that the cylinder walls have lots of lubricant on them, and not WD-40. Make sure you use oil or assembly lube or something on them. And then every once in a while, as part of the storage regiment, I would go and rotate it. I would also not have spring load on the springs. You should back off all the rockers. Richard, I have a 454 and coincidentally planned out a build like yours, 450 horse peanut port head, Extreme Energy 268, nitrided, good. Yeah, no, you can. I don't know what the nitrided cam is going to cost. If you could just put a hydraulic roller in it, probably would be better. And you could do that with a Gen 6 block that already has a hydraulic roller in it if you wanted to go that route. $283, $286. Yeah, but that's not the number at 50 though. The number at 50 is the one that I would want. $280 is going to be $230 something, probably. I'm in a 2007 extended cab, 5.7 truck Norris using a 26 to 2800 saw. Haven't dynoed the engine, but it's quick off the line. That's the amazing thing. Did you ever, Shadow Ops, did you ever run it without the converter in it? Did you ever run it with a stock converter? I'd like to see somebody that has a converter test. Like even a draggy converter test, I think would be awesome. Don't worry about the bores. That's what happens. That's what happens when you are at the starting line of the Silver State and you get to run wide open throttle for 40 minutes. You have a lot of time to think about, are those lug nuts loose? Does it have enough oil pressure? Is it overheating? Have a Gen 4, or would you do the retrofit if flattening lobes at that spring rate is a concern? I read about a Gen 4 LS. I'm not worried about flattening lobes on a Gen 4 LS. For storage, fogging oil works good. Yeah, you can try that. I don't think I've ever used that. Holds on the surfaces and burns off with a zero or a little residue. On my build motor, I soak the cylinders with gear oil since I don't have heads on yet. I always put transmission fluid in it when we put it together first. I think I'm still doing that when we store them too. And that's probably not great because it's fairly thin and I think it would tend to run off. But if you rotate it, it runs off down to the ring and you could bring it right back up. Gen 4 454. Okay. On your typical 350 build, if you buy a new block, new rods, new crank, new pistons with what's available, the pistons down the hole could be down the hole 20 or 30. Okay, I get that. Making the rod 30 thousandths longer will make the piston flush. I get that. I get wanting to make the piston flush, but I thought you were just trying to change the rod ratio, and you thought that the rod ratio was something about how going to change the quench. Most guys just mill the block. I mean, just deck the block. Lug nuts, exactly. That's it. That's what you think about the whole time. Well, that's what I thought about. And then about, I don't know, 6 miles into it, I also started thinking about, I probably don't need like 1,000 pounds of like leg pressure on the pedal to make it wide open throttle because your legs start shaking. I don't know if you've tried to hold wide open throttle for 30 minutes. I ended up just switching feet because my leg got so tired. I would switch over to the other foot and just shake this one, do the hokey pokey and shake that one about for a while and just do the left foot thing. Because I'm not changing gears or anything. I'm just at wide open throttle. And then you switch the legs back and it's all fun. 228, 230. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back now and see what... Yeah, I think Shadow Ops has about right. I was going to say 2,800 to 3,000 is probably fine for what you're doing. 4.8 came out, the stall went in, and the 5.7 went in. Okay. Gen 453, truck Norris cam, dual plane intake. What size stall would I need? You could run that with a stock converter if you wanted to, but you could put 25 to 2800 in there. Anything that you do, the converter isn't a necessity for that camshaft. And if anything, the dual plane might make more low speed power than the truck manifold does, way down low, which is beneficial. But a converter, if you put a converter in, even in a stock 5.3 or a stock 4.8, it's going to make it perform better. So if you're doing it, you should do it for that reason. Have you ever used valve guide liners to run a set of LS valves in a Gen 1 small block Chevy head? I haven't ever tried that. But guys like Airflow Research do that. They put guides in to run the small diameter valves or the small valve stem LS valves in small block Chevys. Any updates on the marathon? We already did the marathon. Well, we did a mini marathon. If you don't know about fogging oil, it was designed for airplane engines, commandeered for watercraft, specifically for water corrosion prevention. It's an aerosolized oil. No, I've seen it before. I just have never tried it on any storage motor that I've run. I put hundreds, so there maybe should be an S there or something. Hundreds of thousands of miles on engines with flat tappet cams. I guess I need to be sure and find oil with zinc in it. Mostly use diesel grade. Okay. What were your air intake temps like on a 40-mile run at wide open throttle? When we ran the Vortec on it, the RPM was that was like 100 and that car could go 180-ish. So I want to say that it was mid 5,000 stuff. And the air temperature was basically rock solid at about 135. And I think that was 7 or 8 pounds. I'd have to go back and look at the data logging, but that's kind of what I remember. But no intercooler on it. But it got to that point and just stayed there. Now we did have a really good, cold air intake, an air source. And we had lots of, we ran it in the morning. So it was fairly cool outside. I don't remember exactly what the temperature was, but it wouldn't have been hot then at that time of year. So the little Vortec was doing good. And that was when we were taking the temperatures on that was pretty sure that was a B trim. So we're searching Tremec, Magnum 6060, buying a Gen 1 small block. I've been told one bolt won't line up on top and the LS bell housing needs to be deeper. Yeah, when we bolt the LS stuff to the Chevy bell housing that we have for the dyno, all of the bolts don't line up. I mean, they don't. We have, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something that do line up, and we put those in. I think we only do 4 because really you're just asking it for the dowels are stopping the thing from moving around. You're just holding it on the dowel. But the depth that you're talking about is definitely different. But they have different flywheels and clutch drive plate assemblies to do that kind of swap. What's the normal operating temperature for an LS1? I don't know. That's going to be determined by usage. Does anybody have a stock LS1 that they've driven around? It's going to go to the thermostat and run at least that because that's what they're going to want to do. And then if it's running hotter, like my truck doesn't seem to run, it just seems to stay about the same temperature. I was told you need a different bell housing for the LS. We don't. We just use the same one. We have a small block Chevy, big block Chevy, LS, 4.3 liter V6. Anything that a Chevy has that bolt pattern, that's the one that we run. We're bolting the engine to the dyno, to the bell housing. We're bolting it to the bell housing, and we have a flywheel on there, and we have a drive plate on there that's the same as a clutch because that's what it is. It's the centered spline section of a clutch. It's just bolted to an aluminum drive plate that bolts to the usually a steel flywheel. So, and then all of that stuff goes inside, and a splined output, just like the output shaft of a transmission, goes into that splined hub, and then that's what drives the dyno. Good evening. I wonder if there's anything I could do to make my throttle less touchy on my T-bucket. Lone 355, Elbrock 750. Barely touched the gas. wants to go. Yeah, you might be able to play with the opening rate. You might be able to work out some kind of rising rate throttle linkage. It would take a new lever on there, I think. You could try that. You could go to a smaller carburetor. I like solid lifter camshafts because hydraulic lifters will fail after a period of time running high RPM all the time. Yeah, if you're running sustained RPM, although my 5-liter Ford, we're running in the Silver State, running at wide open throttle for 32 minutes, and actually, or 35 minutes, and then it was 42 total, but we had to slow down for the narrows and then back to wide open throttle. Hydraulic roller stuff, it was fine. Any junkyard 8.1 tests coming soon? I do want to run the 8.1 again. If I bought valve springs from you, could I pay extra for you to check spring weight and rate? I don't sell valve springs, so I don't do that. I will be before too long for the cams that I sell. So you use a clutch, but you don't use a throw-out bearing to disengage the clutch because you don't need to change gears. We don't. Not on a dyno. We're not changing gears. There would be room to put that in there, and there's the opening for the shift fork in the bell housing because it's a manual bell housing. But we're not using that obviously on the dyno. I have a roller cam in my 88 F-150. It's a 92 5-liter because the cam went flat. I also have a 350 or 57. The flat tapping. Cool. Coolio. Dual knock sensors. Dual knock sensors. No waiting. The knock sensor thing interests me, and I could have Eric help with that because then I could run some more pump gas stuff, and guys seem to like that. Chris, I run 28,000 scap on both the top and the second ring for boosted applications. That should be enough. Should be plenty, you know. Would you risk a solid flat tappet cam in a modern small block Chevy or small block Ford build today? 57%, leading against 43%. 57 saying not so much. Would a tight AR like a 6.8 work on something like an L98 with a mild cam for around 450 to 500 horsepower? Yeah, for that power level, I wouldn't pick a 78, 75, even with that tight of an AR, because the turbo size is the big thing, and then the AR is a small thing. It's an adjustment thing. So for a 450 horsepower 350, I would use a smaller turbo, but that will work. It will go on there and it will make boost. And I don't know which 78, 75 you have. The one that I refer to normally is the one from Byron at VS Racing. Because all 78 millimeter turbos are not the same. So not be afraid to run solid flat tappets or run flat tappet cams. But that was not your question. Okay. (1986) TBI had a flat tappet. Yeah. Later moved to roller due to provisions made in the valley on the spine. That's about 86 on the TunePort stuff. 86 or 87, right, is when they went to hydraulic roller stuff, right? on the tune port stuff, because my 85 was a flat tappet, and I thought that 86 was, and then 86 convertibles got the aluminum heads, but did they get the? I think I'm remembering that. I think that they got the hydraulic roller stuff in. I didn't realize it at the time, but that would definitely be a desirable change. Do you think solid flat tappets would cause more valve train wear or stress over time? I do, because of Lash. Almost all of the solid flat tappet stuff, certainly in the muscle car era, if you look back at that for factory stuff, that was all the high performance stuff that they knew was probably not going to run the same number of miles and usage as a 400, a 250 horsepower 400 in a station wagon was a hydraulic flat tappet camshaft, and most of them were hydraulic flat tappets. Even some of the good ones, like the 350 horse 327 or the 350 horse 350, those were really good hydraulic flat tappet cams. And then all of the other, 300 horse ones, 270, 250, whatever. I learned today flat tappet is mostly China steel, so break-in questionable. I burned up a cam in 2019. I switched to a roller cam. It's safe. Okay. And lots of people have had that. I personally have not. I don't know that I've damaged a flat tappet cam, fingers crossed. I don't know that I've hurt one so far. I'd like more Gen 3 Hemi stuff. Me too. I had somebody that offered me a 6.4 for testing. 86 Vets had one piece rear main, but non-roller. And then 86 convertibles with aluminum heads had rollers. Okay. I swear by Prolong. Really? Oldsmobile V8 was the only engine from the muscle car era that could last 200,000 miles. That's a bold statement. Do you think a long duration cam might need roller rockers? To a point with the LS stuff, it isn't all that necessary. Are you asking about whether an LS needs roller rockers with a long duration cam? On the LS, I would be more prone to going to a roller rocker for two reasons. One, excessive lift actually brings the contact point of a solid or of the factory rocker off of the tip, and it angle loads the tip. And then also, if you have cylinder heads that don't have powdered metal guides, that have like bronze guides, I would be more prone to using a roller rocker. But if you're going to use a roller rocker, make sure you have enough spring pressure. They said the 327 360 horse. I'm not familiar with the 327 360 horse. I'm familiar with the L76, which is a 365 horse, but I'm not familiar with the 360 horse version of that motor. But that one did have the solid cam, and it had the same cam that they ran in the DZ302. But the 350 horse 327, the L79, that was their best selling over the, that was a factory cam, but it's also their best selling over the counter cam for GM performance. What do you think would break on aluminum block in a big bang situation? I think that the mains would move around, and I don't think that the cylinder walls are thick enough. The L79 is hydraulic. It's a hydraulic flat tappet. Right from Joe Mondello himself. Joe Mondello, who specializes in Oldsmobiles, and he's telling you that Oldsmobile is the only one that would do that. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying that I look at stuff like that. Any word on the distributor issue? Who is a distributor? My 81 GMC 5.7 Olds diesel rusted out at 270,000 miles. I know the small block Chevys were not going to last that long. The cylinder bores would wear on those. 360 horse was a 66 vet. Okay. So the closest comparable cam to the 268 button roller I found was slightly less duration. What was the relation to compression again? I don't know what you mean by the relation to compression. Maybe it was 365 horse. So I have to double check. My friend sold me the intake. They may have had a 360 horse version. I'm not up on every option, every different rating for every year. So they could have wiggled that around. But the L76 was 365 horse, and then the L84 was the Fuelie motor of that same motor, just fuel injection on it for the induction system instead of the dual plane and the carburetor. And that was rated at 375. My friend sold me the intake from a 66 vet. We put a dual 4-barrel tunnel ram on it. Probably like that. 360 horse. It's a fuel injected. Oh, so that was an earlier Fuelie motor. Had an Olds 403. Called it window engine because they lightened it, making it weak. Appreciate your sharing your knowledge. We're here. We're here. We'll all get together and figure something out. All sport bikes are cam on solid lifter, fairly similar to flat tappet. They're all going to be overhead cam, right, with buckets. We have a ZX9R at work, 225,000 miles. Still has a factory clutch in it. I'm surprised about the clutch. Matt, you want the Cadillac? Every Oldsmobile was hand-built and blueprinted. How did they have an assembly line with Oldsmobile motors and all of them get blueprinted? I would think that would be really time-consuming. Are you still going to be able to 4-inch bore? Yeah, that's already at the machine shop. 4-inch bore 4.8. It wouldn't be a 5.3. It'll be a 4.8 because we'll have the 4.8 crank. I have a 78 GMC with a 350 and has over 400,000 miles on it. A stock engine. Wow. Even Pontiac V8s were assembly line built. Chris, I use Turbo Smart wastegates. Had a rusted out Olds. The 327s beat the 396. And we got one more minute. Would you risk a solid flat tappet cam and a modern small block Chevy? 58% saying no. I would not. I would not risk it. It's too much. Time ticking away. I think I might do another late nighter tonight. What Joe Mondell said, there's an excellent YouTube video about the 1970 year 455 being built from casting block to finish engine. It's cool how they did it. That would be cool. Those were really popular in jet boats. Overhead cams, yeah, you could do that. You could have the cam go right on the bucket, or you could have the cam go on a rocker like the Honda stuff. Either way, all that's good. Lots of RPM potential and stuff. And the bike motors are amazing. I'm surprised to hear that bike engines last that long. I'm not surprised to hear that a Honda CL100 would last that long. I think it'd last forever. But some of the high performance bikes, I'm surprised, given the RPM and the specific output of the motors, I'm surprised that they last that long. I have never run a Buick 215. I have not. And on that note, it is time to go. I will see you guys all later. Time to feed the goldies.